Appreciate the invitation to address you all today on behalf of the Norfolk and Western Historical Society. Thought I'd take a minute and tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Tim Hensley, and I live in Canova, West Virginia, which is suburban to Huntington. And I grew up during the last days of N&W steam. My dad would take me down to watch the Powhatan era come in with Jays. And I could look out my first and second grade windows at the yard office and watch S1As and Class A's take water there at the tank. And it was quite a busy place, still is. Where I live is where the N&W main line crosses over the C&O main line. So I can look out my office window here and watch both main lines and still see what kind of traffic that moves. Both my grandfathers were railroaders. My mother's dad was killed on the Norfolk and Western in 1926 as a Canova yard conductor in a freak accident inadvertently involving Henry Ford. And my paternal grandfather was a C&O engineer. And when I started with the railroad, I had the pleasure of being a young fireman for men that had been steam firemen for him. But my neighbor where I grew up in Huntington was Willis Cook, who was C&O's PR man. And Huntington was the Roanoke, if you will, of the C&O. We had everything here but the executive department. But all the operating headquarters and the main shops and the mechanical department and all that was here. So Willis kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot of things, and taught me photography, and helped him out a little bit when he had to be two places at once and whatever. And but he got me interested in journalism, and I got a journalism degree from Marshall. I was there at the time of the plane crash. That was my freshman year, and I know and knew every role character in the movie. My neighbor directly across the street, Parker Ward, a car dealer, was killed in the plane crash. So that was a big part of my ethos, and it defines a lot of who you are. And recovery period from that was something out of a storybook that we could come back and have the winningest program in the 90s. But I got my degree in journalism, and the first job I had out of college was on the Williamson Daily News down in the Hatfield McCoy country, and also a big terminal on the N&W. And then I worked 3 years for Nick Rahal, who was the youngest member of Congress. My mother came down with a terminal illness, and I was an only child, and I had to look after her. So I hired on with the railroad, and I became a brakeman. And in less than 2 years, I was a promoted engineer, which was unheard of in those days on the Huntington division. And I got involved in safety committees and communications and a few things like that. I took a leave in 1984 to go to Cleveland and take a full-time job with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers as an editor and a PR representative. And then in 1986, CSX approached me and asked me if I would take a job in their corporate communications department. And I became a communications specialist, and then regional manager of corporate communications, and then director of state relations, and then resident vice president for CSX in West Virginia. In that job, I was charged with everything from pulling a dead engineer out of a wreck cause as a chemical fire raged all around, to personally being in charge of a major visit from the President of the United States. And I worked with the White House and Secret Service for 2 months and put the train together that Bill Clinton took to Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. So got to do a lot of different things, a myriad of things I was over. I did literally what 5 people and 3 secretaries used to do without a secretary. That was, when all that cutting started and you had to do more with less. So I did that, and also represented the Greenbrier Hotel. The railroad owned the hotel at the time, and I represented them in business organizations and in the legislature. Then the opportunity came along to go with Amtrak. My seniority accrued all the time as a locomotive engineer that I was an officer, and I could take that job and make 60,000 more a year, working 3 days a week, than I did as a vice president at CSX 24/7. And also, I could resign my seniority and start growing my corporate pension. So it was quite a lucrative move on my part. So the last 13 years, I was an Amtrak engineer on the Cardinal between Huntington and Charlottesville. So I've always been involved with the Norfolk and Western Historical Society. I was a founding member. Our basic group consisted of a bunch of modelers back in those days. The present organization dates from 1984, and there was a gentleman named Rick Stone who was in the Air Force and in the Strategic Air Command out in Omaha, and he's still a member, and he was at our convention last month. But he got involved, and we had a false start before then. We had a little group, and there was a kid, George Arnold from Middleport, Ohio, and he was only like 17, and we had a little mimeograph newsletter and a few things, but that didn't go very well. And Tom Dressler got involved with it. Tom and I were in that original group, and Dean Freitag and Sam Putney and George Hughes and of course Rick Stone and some of the others, they got involved with it. And Jim Nichols, Reverend Jim Nichols, who's from Bluefield, he's a modeler too. But it basically started out with a bunch of modelers. And so in 1984, we reformed and established the current group as we know it now. Had a nice newsletter called The Era that was introduced. Had an archives that was established under the auspices of Jim Gillum. Jim was president for many years. He was with Circuit City, and he donated a lot of his own personal money to it. But we have an archives at 2101 Salem Avenue in Roanoke. Our website is www.nwhs.org. You can go online and search with what all we do and what we stand for. We don't have any equipment. We pretty much left that up to the Roanoke chapter of the NRHS. We do have a close affiliation with them. Also somewhat with VMT, but Jim really grew the organization and did a lot of positive things. Jim Brewer and some others came on board with it. Of course, I was a member all along, and I was not real active in it at the time because I had so many duties at CSX to attend to. But once I retired about 10 years ago, I got back involved and got involved with Ken Miller and a bunch of people. Ken is the editor of the Arrow, and I've kind of made him ex officio general manager. He's kind of a one-man show, and I let him handle a lot of the day-to-day operations, although I will interject myself into certain areas and whatever. But we've got a really good group, and I'm real proud that we don't have a lot of cliques. That's one thing I haven't tolerated during my tenure. Everybody gets along and seems to be pretty much friends. And although we got different groups and different interests and whatever, I'm real proud about how everybody gets along and likes one another. We have an annual convention down, which we've had down through the years in various places, and we've roamed around to a lot of places on the railroad. Now there aren't a whole lot of places to see with the demise of everything under precision scheduled railroading and all the mergers that have taken place. but we're still pretty active. We have about 800 members at the time. That's not what we once had, but we recently had a meeting with the Southern and the L&N group down in Bristol. Ken and Doug Andre and myself, we went down and met with Mr. Ardrey and David Orr from the L&N group and some Southern aficionados, and we found out that we're in pretty good shape financially, and also we're not as bad as we thought we were in the category of membership. So we've talked for a couple of years about looking for a new archives building. We've more or less kind of outgrown what we had. We had a lot of things stored at what N&W calls GOB East, the old N&W system storehouse. And once Wick Mormon left his office, we had to move out of there. So we leased some property over on Shenandoah Avenue, which is underneath an underpass under Schaefer's Crossing and kind of right across the tracks from where we are now. We're kind of on the south end of that. And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to drive under that underpass and go over there. We'd like to reduce our footprint over there, but I don't think what we've been able to do with everything we've taken in that we can quite do that. It's not real expensive to lease. Our building is paid for, self-sustaining. We have looked at getting in a new building, either building a new facility or taking over an existing structure. We found that would cost us in the neighborhood of $2.5 million. While we have had a successful capital campaign, and a lot of members have stepped up and donated considerable money, still that's a long way off. And if you have to look in the environment of declining membership and youth maybe not having the interest in what they had, we've sort of refocused on $100,000 renovation. We have about $379,000 on hand, and we've committed $100,000 of that to redoing what we have existing. We've done a lot of outside work on our building. We've painted it, and we've cut a lot of trees and shorn up a lot of things, and we've looked at the roof and moving things around in the interior and creating some additional office space. We don't have a lot of artifacts. We do have a few things, number plates, lanterns, historical things on display, things of that nature. But we're primarily into the preservation of documents and photographs and things of that nature. At this time, we have entered about 260,000 items into our log that you can access online in our archives. So, we're real happy with where we stand with that and what we've done. We've got a lot more to go. But I've been happy under the 4 years that I've been president that we made great progress and focused on these things. We've had some meetings with libraries and colleges and things like that to look at where we might go in the future, certainly. And 20 years from now, we have to ask the question, how many of us are going to be here? I think anybody looking at Father Time can ascertain that not a whole lot of us. So, and we're getting a few youth members. We're setting up at a lot more railroad shows and doing things of that nature. And we've had a blip in new membership, as much as you can in this particular environment of today, I think. Generation Z and X and whatever, but one thing that I am proud of is I've kind of refocused on the modeling. We were founded by a lot of modelers, and we have a real good group. Had a couple false starts, people that were appointed that really didn't do a whole lot, and I was not happy with that. But now we have Jim Corcoran as kind of spearheading that group, and he has done a good job. He's had a couple of cars, box cars and period box cars and hoppers that he's got some of the manufacturers to make, and where we can sell through our commissary. One thing I've always been an advocate of, as much as a steam stellar that N&W was, there's not an N&W water tank, wooden water tank available. So I started off with BTS up there in Belington, West Virginia, and Jim is continuing to do that, to oversee that project. Got Mike Rector out of Columbus. I think he's pretty much a mover and shaker in the NMRA. And see, Bill Mostetler is on there. Bill Steller, we had him as a presenter. I had a modeling night at our convention in Radford, Virginia last month. Had 72 people register, and we had some field trips that were very successful and some events, and nice dinner, and we recognized a lot of people that were outstanding members of the society down through the years. So I've been real proud during my tenure that everybody has gotten along, like I said, and there's no pettiness, and not a lot of competition or what. Everybody's kind of dialed into the same thing. In the past, we were instrumental in the Fire Up 611 group under Ron Davis, his tenure. We donated about $25,000 worth of drawings and whatever to that effort, and Scott Lindsay and some of the others. But our members are vast and varied, and they take in a whole different realm of interest within the old N&W. We have focused primarily on what's left between Norfolk and Cincinnati and Columbus as the original N&W, and the old Virginian, which came into the fold in 1959 during that merger with N&W. Don't fool with the Wabash interest or the nickel plate. We have cooperated with those societies, and we've let them come down and take any drawings or things that we've came across, and the things that the railroad has given us. Don't get a lot of monetary assistance from the railroad per se. We do have a good relationship with David Good, who's a former NS chairman, and David always earmarks us as the sharing interest in the political side of things. NS will match their donations and whatever, so he has been very benevolent in that particular area. They have given us a lot of drawings and things of that nature. When we took over the move from GOB East into Shenandoah and Avenue, the new place we've leased, and I pretty much spearheaded that. That was the first thing I did, and I don't know how many trips to Roanoke I made to get that done. And we got a lot of help from the Roanoke chapter. They pitched in and helped us move a lot of these things. But a lot of things are stored. There are a lot of things still to be categorized. There's certainly some treasures in there, different drawings and things, and slowly but surely we're making that available. We have a commissary that you can order things and online and different things, put out the newsletter. We've done several books, although that's not a real monetarily lucrative thing at this particular time. We did a book called 3 Times a Lady that Ken Miller and I did. And Ken and I also did 100th anniversary history of the Cass Meyer Lumber, West Virginia Pulp and Paper Cass Scenic Railroad presence up there in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. And we recently did a book called 13 Scoops Around the Box. It's a kind of a fiction book by Ed King, and Ken and I Ken laid it out, and I edited a lot of it. But we team up on a lot of things that Ken and I do, and with our areas of expertise in journalism. But I wrote O. Winston Link's book, which I'll be happy to answer any questions about. Steam, Steel, and Stars. But anything that we have done, we've pretty much the definitive history. If you look at our news letter of the era, it's a nice, slick paper magazine that comes out 4 times a year, quarterly. We really get into a lot of different areas on that. A lot of people brag on it, and Ken does a great job with his editorship. A lot of people think it's one of the better publications, if not the best publication in the rail history genre or whatever of interest. So pretty much with that gives us pretty much of a synopsis of where we are and what we do. Be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have about my personal interest or the society or whatever.
Okay, folks, if you have a question, open up your mic and ask Tim, please.
Hi, Tim. It's Greg Cassidy. What was it like? I assume you were going through many of the original photographs from O. Winston Link as you were working on that book. What was it like actually seeing those and hearing the stories behind how he took them?
Well, it was a very interesting process. He took these pictures and they'd lain fallow all those years, and I started writing. I got a letter file this thick of the letters that flowed back and forth, and the publisher wanted E.M. Frembo to do the book, and Roger's E.M. Whitaker, and Link kept pushing me. Link wanted somebody that knew something about the railroad, and the fact that I was a small train-struck boy at the time that he made those photographs, I thought that brought a lot of chemistry to it. So finally, we agreed to do it, and I rode the Cardinal over to Stanton, and he picked me up, and we spent 2 weeks going throughout that territory, and I made tapes and things of that nature, and we went throughout the territory. And then I spent 2 separate occasions in New York a week at a time, where I was the first one ever to see all those photographs, and I put them into themes, pretty much organized the book as it stood. There were a lot of interesting things happened. Conchita came into the picture, and I can tell you some stories about that. And Winston was not an easy character to deal with, but in the end, I'm very proud of it. Did a presentation at the Winston Link Museum back in December of the last living link to Winston Link, and I focused in on a lot of the stories and the anecdotes and the tales. And with my journalism background, I had pretty much of a photographic memory, and I could quote verbatim on a lot of things that he said and whatever. And so I might polish that up and try to get that out and make a little hay out of it in the future.
Well, I can't tell you how much I thank you for that book, because it's one of the first books I got where the photographs were the main part of the book. And I could show my wife, just how artistic railroading could be.
Well, he had some problems with the publisher, and he wanted to walk away from it, and I told him, I didn't care who did the book, they were going to do it with my text. So I stood my ground, and he did withhold some pictures from that book. If you notice, the Abingdon branch, there's only like 5 pictures in there, and that was the whole series of pictures, and then the portrait of the railroad part of it. There were a lot more pictures that were to be in there, but it turned out into a real nice book, and got a lot of accolades out of it and whatever. So
Thank you.
Tim, this is Ken Wilson. I wanted to ask you about by joining the society there, can members access and get copies of some of the photographs that are in your archives?
certainly, our membership is $60 a year, and you can get online and search through the archives and whatever. And I went through the whole archives myself. I'm not a really tech type guy. I like a hard copy to write off of and whatever. But I pretty much searched the archives and categorized the printouts into different branch lines and divisions of the railroad and subject matter, things of that nature. But yeah, I went through the whole archives, and there's a lot of interesting things in there. As we go through, and a lot of the material of Shenandoah Avenue, a lot of it's just things stuffed in boxes and things that were just thrown to the back of the archives, and we've cleaned that out and found a lot of good material and whatever that kind of is under the leadership of Doug Andre, and we've seen a resurgence in the volunteers. One Thursday in May, we had 11 volunteers down there one day. So, it's been a real refocus under some of these people that have generated and rekindled the enthusiasm for it.
Well, that's great. What's the process for a member to obtain copies of a photograph, hard copies?
We'll just go through the NWHS.org, and you can search the archives, and it'll give you information on how to order all that.
Okay.
And if nothing else, pick up the phone and call me at 304-633-8512, or Casey@Canova@AOL.com, CASEYATKENOVA @AOL.com, or better yet, call Ken Miller. He's down there attuned to the daily activities, and his phone is 7 I'll get it here in a minute. I'm so used to just speed dialing, I can't. It's 540-793-5830. And Ken will answer your questions or whatever. He's very good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Visit the society's website there, and it'll steer you around all that.
That's great.
Be happy to elaborate on anything else you might want to know.
Tim, this is Mike Bile. Are these documents all digitized, or do you just have a digital index of them?
Well, a little bit of both. We're in the process of digitizing them, and as we go, but there's a lot of raw material that hadn't been digitized. But like I said, we've digitized like 260,000 items, so it's quite extensive. From any subject, structures, track charts, photographs, drawings of locomotives, buildings, things, anything you'd like to focus on, you can find it. NW had some interesting history. It started out as an agrarian southern road with the old Virginia and Tennessee, and the Norfolk, Petersburg, and the South Side, and then under General William Mahone, it was an agrarian southern railroad that he put together under the auspices of the Atlantic Mississippi and Ohio, and to from Norfolk, 408 miles down to Bristol. And then under Frederick J. Kimball, he started the branch line up into Pocahontas along New River. And then with the Ohio extension from Elkhorn to Canova, that was opened in 1892, and then the acquisition of the Scioto Valley in New England, that gave it a through route from Norfolk to Columbus, and then that line to Cincinnati, which is now out of service, the old Cincinnati, Portsmouth, Virginia, that was acquired in 1901. So, but a lot of information. As I said, there were all kind of different parts with the railroad and different architectures, and the old Atlantic, Mississippi, and Ohio stations were said to be designed by William Mahone, and his wife Otelia even put an O on the passes. Some people called it all mine and Otelia's, but he was quite a character, and he was a Virginia senator and had been a Confederate general. And the N&W is pretty much of a Southern railroad in its routes. Even so, in the modern days, after the Virginian merger, and it didn't really take on any kind of other identity until the Nickel Plate and the Wabash merger of 1964. It got a little more cosmopolitan after that, but it was like the C&O, which started in Richmond and originally came to Huntington, and all the old people were Virginians that came to Huntington, and all the people that were in the management of the N&W that came out to Bluefield and Williamson and Portsmouth, all those people were old Virginians, so it had pretty much of a Southern flavor. And you throw in the river, the Ohio River, with the steamboats and the landed gentry that came up from New Orleans to escape the vapors of the deep South and come up to all the springs to take the stages, and later the railroad inland and whatever. It had pretty much of a Southern flair even in this particular area.
Curious, you say it was a Southern road. And most of the Southern roads all had different gauges when they started. Was Norfolk and Western always standard gauge, or did it start at a different gauge?
No, it started in different gauges, broad gauge and 5 foot, and then the standard gauge 4 foot, 8.5. And they put all that together one day, and they changed the gauge one day in 1886. And they were pretty much able to accomplish all that in one day. But there was a difference in the gauges when the Shenandoah Valley arrived in Roanoke in the original Norfolk and Western, which it had become at that time. They had a car hoist there, a steam operated car hoist, to where they'd have to change the trucks out from under the cars and whatever at that particular time and point.
Tim, I've got a question about the shared operation of Southern Railways, the Tennessean. And I know that the N&W handled the Tennessean going over the mountains as it, came out of Washington down through Manassas, Charlottesville, and then handed off to the N&W, pulled by Jays going over the mountain. One of some of the information I had, the N&W had a couple of class PJ coaches that were added to the train in one consist book. Was that fairly common, or is that just a weird heavy load maybe during the war years?
Probably a weird heavy load. Ken Miller is kind of our resident Tennessean expert. But
Jim Miller is?
Okay. Those trains came down to Monroe, and they came in with Southern engines and then later diesels, and the Jays took over at Monroe and forwarded the train down to Bristol. And it was put back with the mountains and the PS4s and whatever at Bristol. I think there was some FA diesels. And I think that lasted up until 1953, if memory serves me right. And then the Southern diesels were operated on a run through. There were 3 different trains, the Birmingham Special and the Pelican and the Tennessee 41, 42 Pelican, and 45 and 46 the Tennessee, and I believe the 17 and 18 the Birmingham Special. I did a lot of research. In fact, I've got enough to do a book on the A, material that's been unseen and whatever. And when I was in college, I was a little more mature. I'd been in the Army, and I would go out and I'd go to Canova here and Portsmouth and Williamson and Bluefield and Roanoke and Bristol and Crewe and over to Norfolk and Shenandoah, and I'd interview all these old railroaders that worked in the steam days. And I would get their tales and anecdotes. I would say, hey, I know the dry history when this happened, that happened. And I said, but do you remember anything unusual that happened, or any little tales that they told or whatever? And I'd go down to seniority roster. Yeah, this bird, he did this or that, or this happened to him. And I'd go down the employees' timetable. Yeah, this happened here, I remember, and that, and they would really open up and share some good anecdotes. Well, one of the good anecdotes I got was from H.T. Nays, who was a dispatcher there on the Norfolk Division, and he ended up as a system rules examiner, Henry Nays. And Henry told me that back during the war, that there was an A that was going to take over a troop train at Monroe, and the 2 Southern PS4s double-headed brought it in, and blew a melodious one long for brakes and whatever, and they got out of the way, and the A backed off the pit with 3 short toots. And Henry said the Southern trainmaster turned to him and said, and laughed and said, boy, that sure is a pitiful whistle. Henry said, I turned to him and looked at him and said, how about what's under the whistle? So a lot of little things like that I was able to glean and from various people. This old line that my grandfather worked on, he was from up at Coleman, West Virginia, and the original main line ran from Canova to Naugatuck over what's called the old line, the old 12-pole line. And that was the main line up until 1904, when the Big Sandy line was open. And the Big Sandy line, once it opened, all the mainline passenger trains were moved over there, as were the coal loads and the more important time freights and the empties and the lesser seal freights, and a local freight and a local passenger train continue to apply the old line. Well, the Big Sandy was double tracked in 1926, which relegated the old line to a branch line, and it was abandoned between Wayne and Lenore in 1933, but in 1932 and then 33, they tore the tracks up. But you can drive along that through tunnels, the old Breeden Tunnel and the Dingus Tunnel, which is almost a mile long, and that was mean country up there. I mean, it was. They had a gang called the Alhoot Gang up there, a bunch of Markhams around Breeden, and it was mean territory. A lot of tales and anecdotes, and a black man's life was worth nothing up in that area. Very mean, very rural, just like the whole Hatfield McCoy country. Very colorful, a lot of tales and anecdotes, a lot of interesting things happen. Anybody else have anything? Well, if not, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you, and I hope that you will join use the materials of the Norfolk and Western Historical Society. And I think we've done a really tremendous job of organizing all that we have and focusing on that. So I look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, Tim, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to provide the information you gave us. I find it very interesting. I was reached over and grabbed that Steam Steel and Stars book you were talking about, and I've read it, but I think I'm going to reread it again because it definitely had some interesting information and some very good pictures in it.
Well, I got a lot of good reviews on my text. Yeah. I won the award for the best feature writer when I was at Marshall. And we have a fairly storied journalism school. But Soupy Sales and Peter Marshall from the Hollywood Squares, they went to my high school in Huntington. And later were in the journalism department at Marshall.
You were in school with a lot of famous people, it sounds like.
Well, I don't know about that. I have been fortunate in my career to rub shoulders with a lot of interesting people.
Very good. Very good. Well, folks, if you don't have anything else, we'll let Tim get back to the beautiful weather up in West Virginia there. And Tim, once again, thank you very much for
one more thing
time.
I might throw a little plug in. I have a bed and breakfast here at the house called the Trainmaster's House. And I have what I would like to think is the finest all-around collection of N&W artifacts in the country. Now, I don't have the best builders and number plates or the best dining car china. Larry Evans and Kim Miller have that, but I've got my office is just like an old N&W country station. And it's just like walking back in time, and I can look out the bay windows, which came from Coal Grove, and see both main lines. So I do that and dabble with that on the side in my retirement.
And how do we find out more information about that?
Go to www.trainmastershouse.com.
Okay.
You can call me.
Well, I might follow you up on that. Might be a good couple day trip for me.
Yeah.
Come down and visit.
Come on down. I'll make a mean crab and asparagus omelet for breakfast.
I was looking for more like sausage gravy on biscuits or something, you know.
Well, we can do that too. You know, we got a couple of those places around here with good old West Virginia country cooking.